Good to go. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this LTP workshop. We have apologies from Councillor Hooper, Councillor Cameron and Councillor Todd for today. And I'm going to hand over to Helen first, who's going to run through the financial strategy. And we do have a couple of memos on Stella for this workshop as well. Yes, we can do that at the start of this workshop, and we'd just like to recognise Councillor Jim Hopkins, who is was a councillor at Waitaki. Many of us in this room have attended conferences with Jim and always look forward to his cheeky grin and wonderful questions that he would ask in the open forum. So we're thinking of all of those down in Waitaki today, and especially their friends and his friends and family. Thank you. Hand over to Helen.
Good morning, everybody. This is the most exciting of all of the parts of the long-term plan. So hopefully you will enjoy the session this morning. I'm happy to take questions as we go through. I don't have a specific point at the end for questions, so just fire them at me and I will try and answer them. So today is the first of 3 workshops that I plan to do. If we need more, we can do more, but I'm planning to work it through 3 workshops for the financial strategy for the next long-term plan, so 27 to 37. The financial strategy is the backbone of the plan because it sets the limits and principles behind the funding decisions that we make and those spending decisions. So the purpose of today is just about understanding what we need to have in the financial strategy, what legislation requires, and just set the foundations really for going forward before we start working through how we actually want the financial strategy to look for the next long-term plan. So the 3 workshops, so today, number 1, understand, come back to you, I think it's the 12th of August at this stage, and we'll have a look at what is in our current financial strategy and look at our current financial position, and just hoping to pull together some sort of backwards looking historical data and also what some future data might start to look like for us without even worrying about what the 10-year budgets might be, but what are we at with, what do things look like with our current position and forecasting that forward, and also hopefully look at some peer data around there as well. So some peer councils just for a bit of benchmarking. And then we'll use that 3rd workshop just to basically set what that financial strategy will start to map out, like what will it look like. So look at things like what do you think our limits should be in the financial strategy, and I'll look at those with you this morning in terms of what we need to do. So this is my perspective on the long-term plan. The financial strategy sits there right in the middle. But all I'm really trying to reflect with this slide is that it really does touch on all of those components of the long-term plan as well. Through the financial strategy, we're required to look at those community outcomes that link in and bear those in mind. The activity and asset management plans also feed in because we're looking at a 10-year financial strategy, and obviously things like our infrastructure and our activities are there for longer than just the 1 year of our annual plan. Budgets and forecasts are a biggie, and I'll talk about that on another slide as to how they fit in with the financial strategy. The infrastructure strategy and financial strategy do have to go hand in hand. They really need to talk to each other and link in quite clearly. And the funding and financial policies, so that's your revenue and financing policy and your treasury policy, they also play a part. And obviously the funding impact statements, so the FISs and the rating FIS that we do that drop out once we've done the budgets as well. This is the way I've always looked at the financial strategy and always presented it to my councillors previously. And apologies for the little graphic AI give me. I asked for trains. They look like little buses with the front wheel missing. But I've always talked about it being basically two train tracks. The financial strategy running on one of those tracks as a separate piece of work from the actual budgets. So the teams are about to get underway with the budget. They're actually already working through business cases, and then they'll start putting the actual numbers into the budgeting system. But at the same time, we're working through you with that financial strategy. Separate pieces of work. At a point later in this calendar year, we'll bring those two pieces of work together once you've made calls around what you believe some of those limits and how that strategy should shape. We will marry that up with those 10-year budgets. What do the numbers look like? And that's where you'll make some decisions. So it's coming together to that point where there's going to be give and take in both the financial strategy and those budgets as to how you want it to land, because they need to work together. So the financial strategy is set, the requirements are set through the Local Government Act. We need to do a financial strategy for every long-term plan. Doesn't mean we have to start from scratch, but you do actually need to review and realign your financial strategy and map out what your next 10 years looks like as part of preparing that. The local government legislation, I'm sure you're very aware, talks about prudent financial management, and the financial strategy is a big part in delivering that. It's one of those key things that locks them together, because your financial strategy overrides the financial direction of the decisions that are made through council for the 3 years for which the strategy stands, and really supports that prudent financial management requirement that's there in the legislation. And the checks and balances in with that, so limits on things like rates, debt, expectations around your investment, delivering on those community outcomes. And there's also what we call prudence benchmarks that are set through legislation that we're required to set through the financial strategy reporting through graphs that you'll see, and then we report on those through the annual report every time we do our annual report. The components that go into the financial strategy, those are actually spelt out in legislation as well. So we need to take into account things like population and growth. Obviously, more growth means more infrastructural spend that we need to account for. We need to think about how we charge for that, which we do through the revenue and financing policy, which feeds upwards into the financial strategy as well as a source of funds. We need to think about a major capital spend, which we will see through the infrastructure strategy, although having said that, this year it's likely only to be roading, but we will have other capital spend through the water services plan, the water services strategy. So whilst we've got our infrastructure strategy potentially with just one of our components of delivery, we do need to think about everything else as well, depending on what commitments you want to make in terms of capital spend. We are legislatively required to set a limit on rates increases. It's pretty open about how you set that. There's no predefined, it must be X percent or X percent plus something. You can specify the equation as to how that's calculated as you like, but it does really need to be measurable. Previously at New Plymouth we used average residential rates, and that actually became quite complicated because there was no defined formula around how you actually calculate those average residential rates. So yeah, keeping it simple is good, and using a measure that the public can also understand and relate to as well is also good.
Helen, when the when or if the rates capping comes in, will that...
I'll touch on that
You'll
later.
touch on that later, yes.
Yeah, I think I'll touch on it later.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got it. Yeah. Yes, I do. I think it's on the next slide. The limits on borrowing, so we're required to set a limit on borrowing. And once again, that's for council to make the decision as to how we formulate that, but it does need to be measurable as well, and hopefully something that the public can understand, ratepayers can understand. The other thing is that we're required to set targets or returns for our investments. That's a bit of a softer thing. It's not a we must receive X%, and it's very much defined through our treasury policies and the way we work with investments, because we do have multiple investments as a council. And also the prudence benchmarks, I mentioned those on the previous slide. Those are graphs that fall out of the numbers that we prepare through the budgets that we then report on through the annual report. So really the financial strategy, it's really about a set of guardrails that we prepare to work with for those next 3 years. But ideally it's about being transparent and accountable to our community as well. So working with terminology and principles that our community can understand just as easily. We have the benefit of having the Auditor General and the Audit Office obviously auditing our long-term plan, but they have also given feedback about what they expect, particularly through the financial strategy. And I've just got some points there about feedback that they've given over the years. It is once again about being clear to the community what we're setting the expectations to be through that financial strategy. And it's not just about the future, it's about acknowledging the past and where we are currently, but setting the goals or expectations of where we expect to be in 10 years. So telling the community that financial story through the 10-year period of the long-term plan. And it must really link into that infrastructure strategy. So audit will come along and look for that clear linkage through to the infrastructure strategy. You can't say you're going to do something in the infrastructure strategy and forget about it for your financial strategy, leave those numbers out, or you're actually majorly breaching the limits that you set because you actually can't afford to fund something that you said you're going to do in your infrastructure strategy. We also have good support through the local government sector in terms of best practice, and Taitura actually review all of the financial strategies and infrastructure strategies that are prepared across the sector, and essentially benchmark those, give out awards for them, so we get to see what good practice is considered to be, which is helpful. Burl also produce inflators for us, and I've got a slide about inflation a bit further on. That's helpful in terms of pulling the numbers together. We are required to inflate years 2 through 10. It's a legislative requirement to apply inflation to the numbers. I think that's about it in terms of legislative and best practice. So just this really ties back to the 3 workshops that I'm proposing in terms of building that financial strategy. So understand what we've got in the first place, consider what's in our asset management plans. Later on we touch on what the assumptions will be, so assumptions out there in the community such as growth, financial assumptions like inflation, interest rates, they all feed into the financial strategy. Having good strong assumptions will build a good strong financial strategy. We'll confirm our priorities, so as we work through the budgets we will talk about things like levels of service, and that links through to the financial strategy and determines how those numbers will actually land, whether they sit within those limits that you set in the financial strategy, And I mentioned earlier about those two tracks and coming together, so there will be some give and take as to what goes in the budgets and what those financial strategy limits are set at. And that's where you'll decide what the priorities around spending are and what those final limits will be for rates, debt and investment. We'll do that stress test once we work with what you think are those final set of numbers. Does that still live within the limits of the financial strategy? So it can be a bit of backwards and forwards as we work through those budgets right through to December, and just keep checking in, making sure that they do align with what we said we wanted to achieve for the financial strategy. And then we work through in the February right through for the audit consultation before we actually finalise the financial strategy alongside the long-term plan. So our current financial strategy, so that was for the years 24 to 34, so we're in year 3, so we're living year 3 of our current financial strategy at the moment. We set a rates increase of 65% across the 10 years, so an average roughly of 6.5% increased rates year on year to fund. That 6.5% includes inflation as to how that was applied, and I've got an inflation slide later that I'll explain to you what inflation was used for the last long-term plan. We said our gross debt was going to peak in 2028 at $192 million and then reduce back through the remaining 6 years of the annual plan back to $153 million. So there was obviously a clear plan in there about repaying debt over that period, because that's quite a chunk of debt that was repaid at the same time as still delivering more CapEx through the plan. We also hold a AA+ credit rating from Fitch, which is a real strength. From a council perspective, it's one of pretty much is the highest credit rating that we can achieve as council, and in turn gives us good interest rates through borrowing through that LGFA. The current financial strategy for the limits that we set on borrowing, that interest costs were to stay under 20% of our revenue and 25% of rates. So in terms of that, they're not very tight limits. When you convert that 25% of rates for your interest expense on our current rates, you're looking at roughly $15 million worth of interest. Currently, on the forecast, we're looking around about $6.5 to $7 million worth of interest. So those are, I don't want to say loose, but they're, in terms of guardrails, they're very open guardrails, and to go to those high limits would probably challenge affordability across the district. The net debt should not exceed 250% of total revenue. That in itself is a tighter limit than those interest ones. That's on the first bullet points, those first 2 bullet points. The 250% of debt to total revenue. Just trying to think, the last time I looked at that, it was probably sitting around about $250 to $280 million in terms of debt, which would be more of a limit than those interest calculations are.
Richard, do you have a question?
Yes, Helen, I agree that the limit's pretty open. It's up to each council to set what it believes its limits should be. And so when will we set, this council here, set its limits for this long-term plan? Because obviously saying net debt 250% of total revenues, that means we could borrow to the max and we could rate to the max, but we need some guardrails so when we do all our budgets, they actually work within that parameters, because at the moment there's none. So, well, there is some, but they're very open. So when would we set those parameters? So
the next workshop on the financial strategy, we will undoubtedly start talking about it, and I would expect you by the time we do the third workshop, which will either be late August, early September, for you to be telling me this is what we want for our limits, and then we'll work through what the budgets actually look like, what the debt looks like, and we'll put those two things together, and you'll have an opportunity to have another look at that.
Hamish?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would it be fair to say that the assessment of affordability is the most powerful limiting factor to these settings, in that those settings create leeway, if you like, from a strategic planning sense, but they don't. No council that we've had of recent times has used them to that extent, because the impact is then on the affordability for the ratepayers, and so that's a bigger limitation and a bigger control than the theoretical limit from the strategy. Would that be fair?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess sitting under that is your revenue and financing policy and your rating decisions that you made, and that can markedly change the perspective of affordability as well, depending on how you apply those decisions.
Richard?
The best example of how that can be altered or managed is for roading. If you fund roading entirely out of rates, or you borrow to fund roading, saying that it's got a 20-year lifespan, so you can increase your debt, and increase the affordability, because you're only paying interest, not paying any capital on the roading renewals. So that there's a double-edged sword. If you borrow more, your affordability will probably get better in the short term. But if you borrow less, you've got to pay for it today. So that's the balancing act I was sort of getting at a bit. With the high debt limit's easy to get to, but someone's got to pay it back. You're just putting it on to the next generation if you're not careful.
That's right, and that's where the affordability really hits, as you start to service the debt that you raise. How affordable is it to meet the obligations to that debt?
Yeah. And one of the key principles too that I actually haven't got on the slides here is around intergenerational equity and who should pay. So that's a factor. While it might be that we can afford it today, should we paying for it today? Yeah. Rates increases. So council set a limit on rates increases for the first 5 years, to be no greater than 10%, which would be plus our GPI. I've got an inflation slide. I'll talk about our GPI because I had to read up on that as well. And for the second half of the LTP, the rates increases were to be no more than 5%. Plus our GPI. So there was obviously acknowledgement in the first half of the long-term plan that there was going to be some pretty big works that were going to be done that were going to trigger those rates increases, and then things were going to settle once that work had been completed. Rates capping, word on the street the end of last week is that it is still possible, likely, potentially, that it may come through before the election. I was hoping to have found out a little bit more last week, but haven't heard any certainty around it. We still work under the legislation that we've got, which is that we set rates limits for ourselves through the financial strategy for the long-term plan. So that is the way that we will work as we go until we hear otherwise. If legislation comes through, it will obviously change the way these limits are set through the financial strategy. So yes, rates capping is in the back of our minds, I think, as we work through the financial strategy. But at the moment, you have the ability to set those rates limits through the financial strategy. The investment returns, through the financial strategy, we look at our investments, but investments largely are driven through our treasury policies. So our borrowing management and our investments sit under the treasury management policies. And we will do a review of those policies also through the long-term plan. So that's a separate piece of work from the actual financial strategy itself. And we'll be looking to do that with you later this calendar year. So we're thinking sort of October, November to push through that Treasury policy review.
Hamish?
I just want to underline that point that Helen has just made. We do have an investment policy within the Treasury management policy, and from time to time, I hear comment that we don't have an investment policy. That's not true. We do. And it sits there inside the Treasury management policies. What that policy does is it's a reasonably conservative policy, as you might expect with public money, and it sets the way in which we go about making investments. And I think the real conversation for council when you get to that is to examine that with the lens of the sort of returns that you might hope to get from various investments, with that prudent approach to public money and the need to protect the principal rather more than attracting the last bit of return. But as we go through this strategy, and you need to be familiar with that investment policy, because it does exist and it is there, and it's not true to say that we don't have such a thing. Yeah.
Inflation. It's always fun trying to do accounting with inflation in the mix because it just really throws out the numbers. But it's really there for the ratepayer at the end of the day, so that we're not whacking on inflation year on year without them understanding what the numbers will look like. CPI, I think we're probably all around the room understands CPI. It's used in the public space, consumer price index. It's a household basket that's set every year in terms of food, rent. The latest CPI is that 4.1%. With it's a target or a stat that's been built for the Reserve Bank, for them to set their target around for New Zealand economics around 1 to 3%, and it's very different to the inflation that we experience in local government. So Bill produce what we call the LGCI, or the Local Government Cost Index, and it is a specific council basket of goods that is reset at least every 3 years, looking at weighting of what is spent in each of those areas, and it looks at labour costs, it looks at the price of oil and all the inputs that go into that council specific basket of goods. And that's sitting around about 3.4% at the moment. We are expecting a draft set of the bill adjusters late August. So I would say as we come into the third workshop, we should know what bill forecast numbers are starting to look like before they do a final set in October. The bill numbers are a forecast, so they're not looking at historical costs, they are very much looking future, and they're looking at OPEX and CAPEX. What we have in the current financial strategy for our limit on rates uses LGPI. Hadn't come across that one myself before, but Local Government Price Index. It is a council basket of goods, but it's a basket of goods. It's not a specific index that is used as such. It's a basket of goods that feeds into the PPI, the producer index. And it is historical looking, so it's backwards looking, which has resulted in a lower inflation percentage. So the current LGPI is sitting around about 2.5%. And it doesn't include CAPEX costs or financing costs or labour costs. So I think in terms of an inflator for us as council, the more appropriate inflation index to use is that LGCI, because it is updated, it's forecast looking, and it is a CAPEX, OPEX basket of goods.
Councillor Moffat.
When you say backward looking, over what period is it backward looking, do you know?
I'm not sure. There was limited data on what I could find, but it was historical numbers that were used to calculate the 2.5%.
So would pre and post COVID be quite different?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Councillor Wilson.
With respect to the long-term plan we're doing, it's effectively a starting point, I guess, is year 4 to 10 of the last long-term plan. Some of that information's used. How do you reinflate that to make up? Because we didn't know what the inflation was the last 3 years prior. So a lot of the business cases and things that we're going to do, the numbers won't be won't be what the new numbers could be. How do you match the two together to come up with some realistic numbers to start with almost?
So the managers will be revisiting those numbers. We're not automatically populating year 4 to 10 in the data set. It is a fresh, clean look. The numbers used for the CAPEX and the business cases that were prepared for years 4 to 10 are being picked up and revisited, and those numbers will be reviewed. Yep. What do I need to look at? Oh, just touching on some of the differences there. So in terms of why don't we use CPI, I think CPI does make sense to the community. But when we look at some specific examples, which I've got there up on the slide, so bridges, the cost of bridges is up 38% and water 27%. If we stuck with CPI as our inflator, we would be miles off. We couldn't pay for the things that we said we would do. I've touched on the box in the bottom right, setting the limit. I've touched on that. So you as council have the ability to set what that looks like, and I've just thrown some examples there. So LGCI plus a percentage, you could fix the percentage, which may well be what comes in with rates capping. You could step the increases. You can set a different rates limit for every year if you wanted to, if you chose to.
In the past, have we set it, I see last LTP we set it 5 years for 10%, 5 for 5%, but in the past have we set it just one rate?
I actually
You
confess
don't-
I
haven't had
didn't
a
look
look?
back at the one
No.
before that. I don't know if you know, Tony.
We have,
My recollection is that you're correct, Mayor Liz, that it was usually a consistent
yeah.
limit across the 10 years.
And I'm guessing, but that 10% was in place because of the bridge. Yeah.
I would expect so.
Mm.
So working through for the new financial strategy, I'm not proposing that we do an about turn and change everything. There's some strengths in our financial strategy, the AA plus credit rating, so we're in a good place with our debt position. Keeping up those debt repayments, those principal repayments. Obviously the bridge will come into there as well, which will lift those repayment amounts. We'll have to see how that plays out. Need to think about affordability in terms of our limits on rates and debt, and make sure that it does link through not only to the infrastructure strategy, but also the other infrastructure that we carry as a council. What can we do to make a better or a more clear financial strategy? I think we've got opportunities around how we actually present the story to the community to make it understandable and clear, so clear in terms of what our inflation limits are for our rates increases if we choose to go that way, so that it is understood. Presenting it in terms of affordability and the graphs that we use. So I'm not saying that what the strategy that we've got is broken. It's already sound. We're in a good space. There's nothing screaming at us in terms of limits and affordability at the moment. I think it's a stay as she goes, stable, keep the wheels turning in terms of the strategy. But we will work through that, and we'll work through the budgets as well and see how that aligns.
Councillor Everest.
Thanks, Helen. If we're going to go to the last item on opportunities and to strengthen, if we're going to present it more concisely, how do we actually do the 4 points above?
Reading through the strategy that we got myself, I found it was quite lengthy, and the way that it was presented, it wasn't clear and easy to understand. So I think that's an opportunity in itself, in the way that we present the information and tell that story.
Councillor Wilson.
And would it be fair to say that because the Three Waters change happened halfway through the long-term plan, we had our water service plan put in place, which wasn't contemplated effect from the last long-term plan. That's actually quite a change for this long-term plan, because a big bit of our work has been almost done for 10 years and is almost fixed in place. That we didn't, like I use an example, we didn't have the ocean farm rebuild or refit, whatever you call it, in the last long-term plan. But now it's in there anyway because of the water services plan. So that's actually changed. That's quite a fundamental change compared to the last long-term plan.
Yeah, I think we're in a lot more stable position. We know where we're at with the bridge, as you said, we know where we're at with waters. So our debt is going to be a lot clearer going forward. And there was the uncertainty around waters, so a lot of councils at that time were preparing 2 versions of the LTP, and I think it was a case of get it across the line. I think it's something we work together with, that I think it's really important that the community understands what's in the financial strategy and the limits that are there and why we're choosing them, and we tell that story as to if it's a 10% rates increase, why is that? Is it because inflation is forecast to be at 5%? It's that clarity across the community.
Councillor Everest.
Where does simplifying local government come into this?
I think I had that somewhere. I probably...
It's okay if you've got it later.
Yeah. I think...
I'll ask it later.
Yeah, I think just as what Helen finds out, there
Yeah.
is a lot of commentary in the sector around the difficulty in preparing long-term plans over a period where the council reform will take hold. But thus far, the government has not given any leeway around the legislative requirement to develop the long-term plan under the current settings. So in the meantime, we carry on with the obligation to develop the plan, albeit in the back of our mind knowing that reform will render some of this work in the latter years somewhat meaningless.
Yeah. So I think every time we come to do an LTP, it's like, or every time we finish an LTP, it's like, man, that was hard. The next one's going to be so much better, so much easier. And then we start the next LTP, and it's like, shit, this is actually harder than, sorry, I shouldn't have said that, than the last one we did. There's always something different in terms of challenges that are thrown at us, and we look at what we're doing now to try and pull the LTP together with so much uncertainty and legislation change likely through the process. In terms of all the groups of activities potentially changing as well, that is very likely through the election period, and what that means for the underlying financial data and how that feeds through is a biggie, and that may not come through till September, October, and that means changes to our financial systems to spit the numbers out the right way for the way that central government says that we should spit them out. There's always something thrown at us. I've got a slide here on the bigger stuff that we don't have control of. Just the current economic and geopolitical climate. We talk about these regularly with you in terms of fuel prices and the oil shocks and the OCR cost escalations. I wish I had a crystal ball, but we don't. We do the best that we can do with the information that we have. We have assumptions, we have financial assumptions, we work within those. Audit looks at those assumptions that we use and tests if they're reasonable. We can update information as information changes to a point, but at a point in time we've got to lock things in and move forward. We just work with the best information that we do.
Question from Councillor Moffat.
So, with what you've just said, excuse me, I'm assuming we have to somehow build flexibility into the long-term plan, but it still has to look solid.
Yep.
So that's quite hard. Is there a way of, in the long-term plan, we talk about scenarios a lot lately. Is it possible to put more than, it's almost like more than one long-term plan. Is it like having different scenarios within the long-term plan, or is that just getting too complicated? I mean, how do you have that flexibility and also give confidence to the public when things appear open-ended.
Yeah, that's a tough one because ultimately you've got to land one draft LTP for the community to consult on, and then you can make changes that are not significant thereafter. Your scenarios, depending on what it is, you could use as your points of consultation. We can do scenarios on modelling for you through the budgeting process, as long as you're not throwing 100 scenarios at us. We can move levers on things, I think is what I'm saying. We can shorten debt repayment terms, we can lengthen them. If you don't agree with an interest rate or you want to take a different approach, we can move that. We can change levels of service. There are multiple levers as we pull those budgets together that we can model for you. And then there's the flexibility and the likes of the financial strategy that is a lever as well, so that the limits, do you set a hard and fast rates increase limit? Council sits there and it says, we want 3%, that's only what is affordable. Then there are cascading decisions around that with a hard limit around knowing that inflation will move within that period. Levels of service would have to change, something would have to move. So that's those two train tracks again. You've got your set of budgets and multiple versions of modelling that we can do, and then how hard do we set those limits through the financial strategy? Do you give yourself a bit of room to move within those boundaries as well? Not necessarily knowing what is going to happen in 1, 2, 3, 4 years. Do you set the boundaries a bit wider so that you're not going to be kept from doing things because of something that's perhaps outside of your control?
Councillor Ellis?
Thank you. We changed the way we're doing DC, so we've got roading now and also subdivisions, we're taking it up front. So you have to make some assumptions around that, I assume, too, as to how many of those we're going to have and the money that's coming in and all those sorts of things. And that will be a conservative assumption, I assume, and if we exceed it, well, there's more money there.
I'll be looking to my colleagues around that, but we do use growth funding through DCs to repay debt. So the more we get, the better, because it will just accelerate the repayment of that debt. Yeah, but growth is definitely a factor through that financial strategy as well.
Hamish?
I think one of the judgment calls is actually in making the change to paying upfront, and the transition and how the market responds to that change will be a lumpy transitional issue. But once we're through that change and it becomes embedded, then we wouldn't expect the level of DCs to be any different to what they otherwise would have been before the change. But there's certainly there'll be additional because of roading, but the transition may well see some early activity to keep it with the building consent if that suits the developer. But once we get through that those decisions and the transition, then we would expect it to settle down to just the normal market activity.
Councillor Wilson?
With respect to the simplifying local government, I understand there are some councils that don't believe they should be doing one because it's going to be superseded if things change in the future. But don't we as a council have to make the decision that whether we believe that or we believe that this could, if things did happen, this could be our last chance to stamp our mark for the next 10 years, or even if it was only 3 years, we send whatever a new structure is a clear signal what our community wants, because that would be the first thing I would look at if you had a new council. You'd open the council's long-term plan and go, well, this is what that community wanted, therefore that's where it leads. So I would have thought, as a council, we need to make a call almost that if we believe that this is super important or it's just something that's going to be superseded.
Yes, I understand your point. In the end, we have just legal obligations to prepare the plan to the best of our knowledge and putting all the things in place that the law requires, regardless of our view as to whether it's sending a future council a strong signal or whether it will be superseded. And we think that there's time being spent poorly. In the end, our legal obligations are really straightforward, and we need to do it to the best of our ability anyway, and unless the law was to change, and if the law changed, we'd have to do what the new law said. So I agree with with the with the argument, if you like, but in the end, we just simply have to do what we're required to do. And there has been no relief granted to the normal way we prepare an LTP because of simplifying local government. So we just have to get on with it.
This slide is what we were just talking about a couple of slides ago. It's pretty much just, I want to say what Hamish said. Local water done well and moving through into the separate water services. Still part of the numbers that we're pulling together, but we're ring fencing. And obviously the Head Start, we don't know. It may move things materially, but we don't know. We just work with what we know at this point in time. So that's the end of the slides that I've got for you today. The next workshop, 12th of August, I will come back to you with lots of numbers and graphs and my happy place, looking at where we've come from, where we are now, and what things are in place for going forward, and hopefully bring you some benchmarking against some of our peers as well, as best we can benchmark, just to give you an idea of how we are looking. And we can have a conversation there going forward, start thinking about what some of those limits and how you want to shape that strategy.
And the financial strategy, we consult on that, or does that?
Yes, it forms part of the long-term plan. Yep. It's one of the jigsaw. There's multiple jigsaw pieces that form the long-term plan, and this is one of them. It doesn't sit above, or it's just my baby.
It's on that train track.
Yeah.
Councillor Everest.
Thank you. We just skipped over the last slide where you talked about Head Start program, but actually one of the things that the government has signalled is that the regional council won't exist after 2028. How do we factor that into our proposals?
We don't have the exact legislation yet to know how that plays out, so we prepare it on the knowledge that we've got as we work through the process. Things may change as we work through the long-term plan, but at the moment we're delivering the functions that we currently deliver.
And that's in parallel, of course, to the regional council still preparing a long-term plan as it is required to under the law. So there's both are having to make the same assumption. At some point, they'll need to be merged into whatever unitary authorities exist post-reform. But the regional council, even though the signals to them are that they won't, they're not going to exist for the 10 years, they are still having to prepare a 10-year LTP as well. So this is back to the legal obligation that each party has.
I thought that the regional councillors would cease to exist from October this.
But not the regional council.
Ah.
So as I understand the reform,
okay.
the regional councillors don't exist from the election in 28. But if parts of the regional council have not been accepted into a Head Start proposal, then the signal is that the mayors of the district councils or the territorial authorities elected in October 28 have to form a way of governing what is left of the regional council through the backstop reform process.
Yep. Councillor Wilson.
As part of this process, can we send a correspondence to ECAN asking for a breakdown of, in their current long-term plan, because they're doing it now, the expenditure that is put in our district? Because that would be a great starting point for us to understand what they're spending here. I know there's been some twos and throws as to they're a wee bit confused what they spend here, but it'd be great from us, because that would be if they're doing that as we go along, if it did get dropped on us, we'd actually have a template of what they're spending in our district, income and expenditure, which is what we want to know anyway going forward. But now would be a good time for us to send correspondence to them asking for that information to be forwarded as they do their, because they must be itemising it out as they do it anyway.
Through Madam Chair, we've had many conversations with ECAN about the value of that information. But to be fair to them, they don't record the information in that way. And it will be like asking us to itemise what is spent south of Hinds. And we don't simply collect or gather the the spending information in that way. So I think it's quite reasonable that he can don't do that. They're the regional council. They haven't had to think about how it is spent across the various districts up to date. So they are aware of the value of the information. They are aware of the request. They've had one go at it, but it was a desktop exercise that we felt needed a bit of rework, and they're still talking about doing that, but that information has not come to light, and they haven't done it, and they can't do it easily because that's not how they record information. So they can tell us how much rates are collected from the Ashburton District, because that's just a ratepayer database subset. So here's how much is spent. Here's how much is recovered from the Ashburton District. What they can't tell you is how that marries up with expenditure. They can for targeted rates, so we're not talking about the river rating districts. Obviously, we're talking about those things that are much more general in nature. They don't have that information easily to hand. So we continue to talk to them about it. In fact, the Mayoral Forum meeting yesterday referred to it again, and the chairman acknowledged the value of that information, but he also knows it is not easy to do and hasn't been able to be supplied to date.
So to answer to Councillor Everest's question about it, that would be the one thing we can keep pursuing right through this process as to what they get from our district and what they spend in our district. Because every bit we can gather up, we can understand if it's a good deal or a bad deal he can with us, which then we can.
Yes, I don't think though it's going to be useful information for the LTP, but because the LTP is needing to be prepared on the basis of our current legislative setting, which is as a district council, not contemplating outcomes of simplifying local government. The information to me is of real value, but more to the simplifying reform process itself, and understanding costs and options that we're still wrestling with, rather than the LTP. Because we're not, at the moment, this LTP, as Helen says, is not going to include an assessment of the costs of regional functions for this district. It's going to be an LTP that's based on the functions we currently have by law, not a different scenario. And equally, ECAN are going to be preparing a long-term plan on the basis of the functions that they are required to perform by law, not contemplating post-reform outcomes. That uncertainty, of course, is why a number of our colleagues are advocating for a different way of preparing this LTP, because the real world has reform in it, but that's not where the legislative settings and the obligations sit at the moment.
Councillor Everest.
That said, it is a waste of our resources and time, largely. We're having a plan that actually is going to be unable to be implemented, or in fact devoid of some of the material items that should be included. So I mean, we need to send those messages around. We can't just hide behind it, in my view.
And that is the very reason why many of our colleagues are advocating to the government that this LTP should be done differently. But thus far, the government has not changed the law, and our obligation is exactly as it was without reform. But the arguments you make are the very reasons why a number of councils are making that point to the government, but it has not yet elicited a response. So our legal obligation is clear.
Any more to add, Helen?
Oh, that's me done for today. Thank you.
You done? Tony, what have we got coming up next? Is it worth having a cuppa break now, or should we?
Maybe we should. We just need to flick over the presentation. After
Okay.
this, we're moving into a similar overview of the infrastructure strategy and the water services strategy.
Okay, so we'll just have a quick break now. 10 minutes, thank you. And we've got Mark and Femke here to go through that with us, and again, I guess just questions throughout. Yep.
Thank you, Liz. So we've had a conversation on financial strategy. So this next part is going to talk through a bit on the infrastructure strategy, water services strategy, which is new, and talk a bit about our significant forecasting assumptions, and then we'll get back into the revenue and financing policy conversation we started last week. So the second, third and fourth will just give a bit of an overview really, and we've got a couple of questions that we want to seek at this point, but we won't be seeking any great detail. So the infrastructure strategy is another building block of the LTP. It's essentially sort of a higher level strategic view of infrastructure issues. And it joins up that operational planning at the sort of asset level and the strategic planning at the more corporate level. So it brings in sort of a synthesis of infrastructure issues that are likely to arise over the next 30 years, including their financial, non-financial consequences and the options for how we might manage those. Previously, the IS included water services, which you'll know now is no longer part of the infrastructure strategy, but it has to include as a minimum the roading activity and in a regional council sense flood protection and river control. It has to cover the next 30 years, so the big issues should be identified for all of the infrastructure assets that it includes. And you'll see here I've sort of put it alongside the financial strategy, so they need to tell an integrated story together. So while the Act, the Local Government Act, sets them out separately, the link is very much explicit through their content and their purpose. So they tell a story together about the levels of service, the costs, the trade-offs, and the financial prudence to deliver that. This is what the law states. I've stolen some of Helen's slide presentation to present this. So again, it's presented as part of the long-term plan. It's a 30-year focused document, and like all of these, it's reviewed and updated every 3 years for that LTP cycle. And in terms of the statute, it focuses on those significant infrastructure issues over the 30-year period, and the principal options for managing what those issues might be and the implications of those options. So again, what goes into the strategy from the Act, what those significant issues are and the options, the estimates of capital and operational spend in detail for the first 10 years and then in 5-year periods for year 11 to 30, how those infrastructural assets will be managed, taking into account a number of factors such as renewals and replacements, how we'll respond to growth or decline, service changes, levels of service changes, and other matters to focus on things like risks from natural hazards or climate change. It's all based on assumptions in terms of the life cycle of those assets, the growth, decline and demand, changes in level of service and others. And obviously again has to take that 30-year view, and it does not include water services any longer. As you know, there's always a lot of infrastructure challenges, so in terms of, I guess, what the IS is trying to present, so these are some of the ones that are common, having a good asset knowledge, understanding the age and the condition of our assets to inform our decisions about them. The funding, so there's always a degree of constrained funding to replace them over time. There might be implications in terms of how we can get supplies of materials, expertise to manage those assets. Community expectations, so there's always a degree of expectation from the community about the standard of service that we're providing, and maintaining that service, increasing that service in some cases over time. We're subject to increasing standards, obviously, particularly in the water space, and increasingly in other areas as well. And there's a need for that resilience and future-proofing, so understanding how we can make sure our infrastructure is resilient and fit for the future, understanding the implications of things like changing demographics and technology and what they might mean for that infrastructure going forward.
So just a question, so the infrastructure strategy, that gets reviewed every 3 years?
That's right, yep.
Yes, and then the water services strategy, is that every 5 years, is that correct?
No, it's a 3-year
That's
review as well.
3 year as well.
Yep,
Okay.
so we'll talk about that pretty soon. So again, like the financial strategy, the good news is that we've done a good job in terms of what audit have told us in the last wee while. You'll see the quote in the blue box praised our last infrastructure strategy, and I've used it in terms of helping with their guidance and helping as an example of good practice. But in terms of their expectations, again, they expect us to tell the story right in terms of the past, present, future, be explicit about what those options, goals, trade-offs might be, and as a part of that, create that right debate through the infrastructure strategy. Their guidance suggests that we should include more than just the core infrastructure, so more than just the roading and waters as part of an infrastructure strategy. That's obviously your choice, and that it should cover the period to sort of adequately show the future situation of council. So in that sense, understanding some of the big pressures that might be coming up across those assets. So for example, roading, we've got a whole lot of bridges that will eventually need replacing. That'll be something that might come outside of that 30-year period, but should be something that we're thinking about. So in that sense, I guess we did sort of briefly touch on this a wee while ago, but didn't get a fixed decision, guidance at that point, as to what you think our 27-37 infrastructure strategy should contain. Obviously it doesn't have to contain water anymore, so the options are there whether we just do roading only, maintain it as that, which I guess we're sort of settling on at this point, but that's up to you. Whether we include roading, waste, minimisation, and key council facilities, core council facilities like EO networks, or some other alternative.
Councillor Ellis.
Thank you. If we don't have those others apart from roading in the infrastructure strategy, where do they fall?
So for all of our assets, we do what are called activity management plans, which sort of guide only 10-year focused documents generally, and will feed through into the long-term plan. Obviously, for something like a large facility like EA&C, for example, it won't show when we have to replace EA&C, which might be 20, 30, 40 years out.
Yeah. Okay. Because if we include it in here, I assume it would get into a bit of detail around renewals and that for the buildings. Like after 15 years, we know we're going to have to do X and spend some money to do that and those sorts of things. And it'd be a more planned approach in that way, or does that already cover it in the way it's done now?
It'll show it, we'll certainly cover it for the first 10 years, but beyond that period, and Sarah may be able to add to this, I don't think we focus too much on that at this point.
Yeah. It's just now that it's already 10 years old, another 10, it's suddenly 20 years old, and there will be things, obviously. And I'm not only talking that, I'm talking Rockefeller as well, and then this building will start to fall into some renewals over the next 10 years, I'm sure, with some components.
Sarah?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. There are a couple of business cases that are coming to you as through this long-term plan process that captures the need for some renewals and some replacement work. We're also very fortunate that the property team has engaged a number of consultants to formulate the longer-term asset management plans for the facilities, so almost outside the span of the next 10 years or even the latter years within these 10. So as a facility occupier, it's been really great to have this proactive approach by the property team, and so we're thankful.
Councillor Everest.
Thank you. To provide clear visuals to our community and ratepayers, how are we going to achieve this when we keep extracting stuff out of the strategy? And I'm talking specifically, I mean, if we don't include those key buildings, if we don't include Three Waters, Water Done Well, whatever you want to call it, we actually aren't able to get the full picture of what's going on within the community, are we?
Yep, so to cover off the water aspect, that'll be covered as part of the water services strategy that we'll talk about very soon. So that's still effectively an infrastructure strategy for water services. In terms of other council facilities, we currently don't have those in our IS, but that's an option that you can choose if you want to at this point.
Because certainly it came through in the brief of the financial is that we need to have our long-term plan. But if we're actually excluding some of those items from it, we're not really creating a true picture. If we're not covering depreciation or renewals, let's say, or debt repayment on some of those items, then clearly we're not really painting a true picture to our community. So how do we go about that? I mean, my solution is the other. It's definitely not one. But I'm not sure, I need some help from you guys as to where we should go, but we can't deal with only half the story.
Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, I would support Councillor Everest. The roading only is not, it's actually relatively easy doing roading only because we actually have there's quite a structure around how we do roading anyway, because it's funded through half by the government. So the structure that it falls out is, pretty much there already. And just renewals of bridges, well, you'd expect that would be in there anyway, because you can't not spend, if you haven't got a bridge, no point fixing the road, is it? So that would have to be in there. That's an assumption I would make, that you'd be, and if it's millions of dollars in the future, you need to know what it is now so that you can prepare for it. And the other two, does key council facilities, does the infrastructure policy, does it cover things like open spaces, like one of our biggest spends is the domain? Where do they fall into that? Are they not?
No, this is genuinely infrastructure, and we wouldn't regard open spaces in the same way as we regard, pipes and roads and bricks and mortar. So the infrastructure strategy is just part of the LTP. It's not to say that those other facilities you're talking about aren't included. It's just that they haven't traditionally been included in the infrastructure strategy. It's not that they're not in the LTP. It's just that this infrastructure strategy historically has not included them.
And I think now, because water has its own strategy.
Yeah. Water can't be in here by law.
No.
So the water will have its own strategy. It's just now the choices that you have around what the infrastructure strategy should contain.
So would it include, you're saying the core ones? There is core ones, and there's a lot of other facilities we own. If I perhaps use an example of the sports hall, which we now own, that wouldn't fall under the core ones, would it? Is it infrastructure?
Well, these are the choices that you get to make. We haven't had property traditionally in the infrastructure strategy at all, as I heard Mark say. So it's whether you want to bring in the major facilities or all property, or how you feel the council and the community is best served by the way in which you consider these matters. That's the choice that is yours to make.
Go to Helen.
Thank you. In regards to those key council facilities, we are doing asset management plans. So as Sarah referred, there has been a specific piece of work done around the buildings and the renewal requirements and the longer term life of those assets. That will feed into the asset management plans that form part of the long-term plan that you as council will get to see. Those asset management plans populate the 10-year budgets that you will get to see for those facilities, and that does include things like the depreciation. So I've introduced you to the concept before of not just looking at funding the current year's depreciation, but funding it based on what those renewal requirements are. So those asset management plans and the piece of work that Renee's team have done will inform the amount of renewals that we actually need to be providing for as well. So we will be able to have that conversation about where you feel comfortable for providing funding for renewals for not just the 10 years of the plan, but what does that look like in the longer term as we work through the whole LTP process and balance that with affordability as well at the same time.
Councillor Moffat.
Just thinking about the meaning of the word infrastructure, to me, infrastructure is like a connecting thing that enables other things to work, like a road, or so something like a sports hall. To me, that wouldn't be infrastructure. That's not part of keeping things going as such. So thinking about that with the likes of solar and IT, which would they both come under infrastructure?
Not historically, no.
Is that something that could be introduced? Would they fall into that category, do you think?
No, we would probably see IT as far more of enabling overhead, supporting activity rather than community-facing infrastructure. So we have seen those differently to date. But the will of council will prevail. If everyone sees it a bit differently, then let's explore that. But historically, we haven't seen infrastructure as the IT system.
Because I'm just thinking of things like Snap, Send, Solve. That is part of, the bits that keep us connected to community. So I don't know.
Yeah. There's various ways you can look at everything we do. The infrastructure has tended to be the hard stuff you can see, as opposed to a software application or something like that.
Councillor Maxwell.
I'm looking at bullet point 2 and 3 as an other, and given that this long-term plan is going to be feeding into whatever the next entity is, I think all of those things need to be included so it indicates going forward to the new entity. These things, have some costs and what have you, but also where does Lake Hood fall on all of this? Because there's certainly some infrastructure around Lake Hood as well as the open spaces type. So should that be included here?
Fair question. All those things you refer to are in the long-term plan. And Helen's talked about the asset management plans, which you will get visibility of through this process, being included in the way in which the LTP is compiled. So it's not that these things don't exist or aren't visible. It's just that they're not in the infrastructure strategy.
Yeah, but I'm meaning them being visible for 30 years, not 10.
Yes.
Yeah. So when it goes forwards, it's visible for the 30 years, not the 10.
So would Lake Hood be included in the asset management plan? No.
Isn't today.
No. Okay.
Not at this stage, but I guess as work happens on that, there'll be some sort of asset plan probably put in place, I imagine.
And I'm thinking also car parks or car parking areas. They wouldn't come under roading, would they? Under transportation? No. They're property. They do or they don't know?
No.
Helen? Or Neil? Helen?
Under the draft legislation I saw last week, the car parks do, but that's subject to submissions and hearings and things now as to whether that stays on there. So
Come under transportation
Yeah.
or roading?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
Councillors, any thoughts on this, or do we want to sort of park this until we look at some of, say, the asset management plan? Yeah. Or is there anyone that would like to? I'm guessing that roading only is not a an option, we would like to sort of expand it a bit. Councillor Wilson? Oh, and then I'll go to Neil. Oh, Neil?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to mention that the infrastructure strategy is really something that provides a 30-year window as opposed to a 10-year window. So all the other activity management plans clearly do a 10-year window every 3 years and capture most of the decisions and the renewals. It's just the really bigger assets that you typically need to consider 30-year ahead. It makes sense for them to be captured in the infrastructure strategy. So the bigger assets that's life needs to be renewed, typically 20, 30, 40 years is probably what's more appropriate to be in the infrastructure strategy.
Councillor Wilson?
You put waste up there. What do you mean by waste? Because if we looked at rates affordability, the waste is the biggest area that's caused grief, you'd say, in the last annual plan, because it's gone up, 75%. Waste, with green waste coming and all that. So when you say waste and infrastructure, what do you mean by that?
That would be new infrastructure going forward to allow for growth. For example, the Methven Resource Recovery Park, the reuse shop down in Ashburton, if that's to be replaced at some stage going forward. It's really those assets. Yeah.
So that would fall into we've talked about this when we talked about property and how that's split up. There's investment assets, which is land we own that we should be getting a return off, and then there's major assets like this building, the pool complex and the Whakawhaka area. Sorry, close.
Really?
Those three are critical, but then there's other ones that we have that are historic ones, but are not actually the major criticals. There's a couple $100 million worth of assets between these three big ones. I thought they would want to be in because they're such big assets and big numbers that if we don't do it right, we could in 10 years' time be faced with a $10 million bill to fix one or do something. So we need to be preparing, and if it's pay off debt in the meantime, well, that's a good outcome, but they need to be in because of the size of the numbers they're worth.
Yeah. Any other comments on that? We can circle around back to this, I guess, Mark, that's okay. Yeah. Would you like a steer now?
I guess we're sort of starting to get in that position where we really need a steer, so we can start to do the work around it. So today will be good if possible.
Okay, so is everyone happy with the roading waste plus the key council facilities? Or is there anything else? Sorry, Councillor Gilkison.
I was kind of keen to see what the asset management plans look like, because I think from a long-term view, I don't think they need to be in the infrastructure strategy. They're looking at the infrastructure strategy. It's not going to be very big when you don't include anything with three waters.
That's right. Yeah.
Which is fine, and that still means that we're meeting the legislative obligation.
Yeah, and I think for me it's the core things that need to happen. Whereas, and I know asset management does need to happen, but I do actually see them as separate things. Yeah.
Any other comments? I'm not, Tony.
Just picking up on Councillor Gilkison's point, we could send the current, the 2024 asset management plans to council if you wanted to get an understanding of what they already contain. They're not light documents; they're pretty extensive. So there's a lot that has already gone into those ones. They're being updated currently, but we can send you the 24 ones if that's of use.
That would be handy. Okay. Councillor Wilson.
Aren't they more though around the physical, what you're going to do, whether you want to replace a chair or air conditioning and all that, not really the totality of, is this building fit for purpose in 20 years' time, and how are we going to get from where it is now to where it needs to be, if you know what I mean? That's just repairing and maintaining it. It's not sort of thinking, well, are you going to replace it? Are you going to sell it? Are you going to do whatever you're going to do? Isn't that more what the strategy would be about, where you want it to be in 30 years' time?
Not so much about the disposal.
Well,
more to Neil's point, I think, around big pieces of infrastructure that have a long life, that you're wanting to have visibility of, significant repairs and maintenance that is going to be required along over the number of decades ahead, and that's perhaps the distinguishing point between the second bullet point and anything else, if you like. So those big rocks. So, Madam Chair, I'm detecting a relative degree of comfort with that second bullet point in terms of a change that we want to make for the infrastructure strategy. There's no one, I think, arguing against that. It's whether there should be
Anything else?
other things
Yeah.
added that start to make the infrastructure strategy a little bit different to that big multi-decade, big infrastructure kind of piece. But perhaps we can start by saying yes to bullet point 2,
Yeah.
and then as we keep the conversations going, if there's anything to be further added once you've seen the asset management plans and further kind of time to consider, it may be that there'll be other additions to it. But it's intended to be as Neil says, the big stuff.
And
Would in the waste management, would that include Cape Valley because it's
no.
but even our ownership and involvement in that as a strategy should be discussed, because future councils go, we don't need it, we can go to Tim, we can do something else, because that's isn't that part of the infrastructure? Because we're lucky that we've got there, because we don't have to be worrying about dumps and all that sort of stuff.
Well, we're a shareholder with a contractual commitment to Cape Valley. It's a slightly different discussion as to what its ongoing maintenance or development requirements are. There's the company of which we are a shareholder of that is sitting there thinking about those things. It's not really council that is contemplating the maintenance and development of Cape Valley in the same way as we do with the things we own and are charged with ourselves. So no, I think it's different.
And I guess if we went with bullet point 2 and included the facilities, that was simplifying local government coming up, that almost gives a bit of a clear steer of what we would like to see with our council facilities as well. So similar to what Councillor Wilson said before about setting the LTP and having that in place so that when, if, whatever happens with amalgamation, there's sort of a clear set of almost guidelines, I guess, yeah. So happy with that, and Neil, you've got your license. Sorry, the chair's right on your way.
Just to add, the activity plans, the infrastructure plans, typically have the condition of the assets, the age, and identify renewal programs, what needs to be replaced when. But it also looks at growth and looks at assumptions and looks at where there is growth and where we may need new assets or extend our current network. So it does it as well. And it also captures agreements and commitments. Like if we are with the regional with Cape Valley, it will identify then in our activity management plans what our commitments and agreements are and how long they last. And, so it captures the whole activity and looks forward to the future as well.
Thank you. Right, so we'll look at that bullet point 2. Cool.
All right, thank you. Any other questions on the IS while we're here at this point?
Nope.
Okay. So, a new kid on the block is the water services strategy. And you'll see that it's it's still part of the LTP or still part of that conversation, but it does sit outside of it. But effectively, you're doing a water services LTP with the changes under the water legislation. So again, we do this every 3 years alongside the LTP cycle. It has to cover at least 10 years, but also up to 30 in terms of the infrastructure part of it. And we're reviewing it every 3 years. Statutory purpose, you'll see there in terms of a water services provider, which we are as a territorial authority. And so it's a basis for accountability. It's about providing all of the information related to water services around costs of investment, charges, levels of service, financial forecasting, long-term infrastructure and so on. And the section 17 that's referred to there is, this is what it is in the Act, that in terms of the objectives that we have to provide as a water services provider, and that the water services strategy must meet, plus any other outcomes that you think is appropriate.
Councillor Ellis?
So how much new work are you going to have to do on that as opposed to what was already done for this?
Well, a reasonable amount. I mean, obviously the water services delivery plan forms a basis for it, and that will be a key document that feeds into it. But there's still, effectively, it's an update for that for the next 10 to 30 years as well.
Okay.
And I mean, there's a legislative requirement base of information that we know has to go into it, which is different, I guess, to what has happened in the past.
And my recollection, Mark, is that for the internal business unit councils or standalone business units, they're required to do an updated water services delivery plan every 5 years.
That's right.
As well as the water services strategy associated with the LTP. So they're seen, I guess, under the legislation as two separate requirements.
Thank you. That's where I was getting mixed up, because I knew there was a 5 years somewhere. Okay.
So again, in summary, it's the key sort of public planning and accountability document for a water service provider. It replaces all the LTP water content, and it does set out council's or us as a water service provider, our policy intentions in terms of delivering those three activities. The statutory purpose, we have to deliver it alongside the same LTP cycle timeframe, so we have to have one in place by the 30th of June 27.
Councillor Wilson?
Would it be fair to say under the structure, even we're an in-house business unit, but even if you're a CCO, the strategy would be done under the same basis. It's only the governance that's really different. So the strategy is a strategy under the Commerce Commission and under Te Mara Awai and all that sort of stuff. So really, it's quite constrained as to what we have to do anyway, isn't it? There's a little bit of leeway, but a lot of the stuff is reasonably dictatorial almost.
Well, the baseline is to comply with the legislative requirements, but there is certainly leeway as to how you might do that, and we've had a lot of conversations about water meters and volumetric charging. Well, that's not a requirement of any legislation, so there's a choice. We're having a look at some business cases around solar providing energy to water treatment plants. That's not a compliance or a legal requirement issue. When you might expand a network, the choices that you make around where you make those extensions, they're not a compliance issue. They're legitimate governance decisions for the network. So there is still quite an amount of discretionary work associated with the water services strategy. What's not discretionary is is meeting compliance, both through the regional council consents and with Te Mara Awai standards, and coming up the Commerce Commission oversight. Those are the things that don't have discretion, but within the work program there is still discretion as to how else you might develop the network.
So as part of the strategy, will we have, we as governors have a firm grip on the has to do things, which is the quality and the quantity of water, before we start delving into the wants to do's? Because the wants to do's are easy to say. We'll do solar on everything, but then we've got other stuff, like, so if I would have thought Ocean Farm falls into the has to do,
correct,
before the want to do's.
Yep, we would see it exactly the same. And Montalto is a must solve, not a discretion. And you'll notice, or you might recall, that the Water Services, or the Three Waters Committee, which is performing that part of that governance layer to the water services, has got sections focused on compliance. It is reporting on compliance both with the consenting regime and Te Matarawai's requirements to the governors every time you meet. So we're already focusing you on compliance obligations, and they will have, of course, budgetary impacts as you go through the water services strategy and ongoing planning work for the networks.
Right.
So again, this slide sort of tells you some of the detail of what has to go into a water services strategy. So that's outlined in Schedule 3 of the Local Government Water Services Act. And essentially it pulls together all of the stuff that would have gone into an LTP and all of the stuff that would have gone into a water services infrastructure strategy, plus a bit more, obviously, because we're within a framework where we are regulated by Commerce Commission and Te Matarawai. So it's a strategic focus document in terms of understanding the priorities, how they will be met, and all the impacts and factors that might impact on them, such as growth. It's all the operational stuff, the nature, scope of the activity, our levels of service, the performance framework around that, alongside the regulatory requirements, particularly for that 10-year period. There's also an obligation around consumer feedback in terms of how council will, highlighting how council will look to obtain feedback from consumers. All the financial information, so a complete set of forecast financial statements, so that's things like the statement of comprehensive revenue and income, so and financial position, so all of that sort of stuff has to be redone for the water services particularly, and how we look to fund, collate revenue and price water alongside the capital and expenditure, operational expenditure program. So a lot of detail in that space particularly, and also the longer term focus, so the 30-year look, the most likely scenario for how we'll look to provide water services over the next 30 years, what the impacts are, the cost, the significant decisions and options that need to happen over the next 30 years. And alongside that, all the assumptions that underpin all that information. So I guess while some of this is not actually new to councils, it's new in terms of how it's being pulled together in this sort of framework. There's been a couple of water services strategies that have been prepared for organisations that aren't water service providers, and I mean they run to 150 pages at least. So they're a significant piece of work.
Councillor Wilson.
From the last long-term plan, we had 5 or 6 different lists of things that we were, and I know it's been overridden by the water services. In the meantime, the change, but one is complete universal water meeting installation. It says decision required 2026 for the next long-term plan, and so that some of those decisions have sort of been put in there, but we never actually really, we didn't discuss them as a thing. They were sort of put in there because the government said you need to do a strategy, and you've said there's some flexibility, Hamish. So when does the council say yes, we're going to put water meters in everywhere, and they're going to be operational by now? Because that's not, we're sort of doing it, but we haven't had that. Or another one is the threat, changing our renewal program intensity. Montauto one, obviously. Another one is water charging. Decision required 2027 or later. Those decisions need to be made sort of before you do your strategy, because if you don't, someone's got to actually say yes or no, don't they? Because to that.
Well, indeed, and those are governance decisions, and they're included in our current documents because governors of the day agreed with those things. So if there is decisions to be made that have been signalled in previous documents, then council will need to resolve those through the development of the water services strategy and long-term plan budgets and the process to complete this piece of work.
So when would those questions be asked? Because obviously if you're going to have universal water metering full stop, that needs to be done pretty soon, I would have thought, that decision.
That's in the budget.
That's in there now.
In the annual plan.
It's already in there.
Yeah.
So
That's in this year's budget.
Yeah, that decision's been, well, I'd say we think it's been made.
Okay.
Yeah. But all those decisions are part of the governance process. The current arrangement for the standalone business unit is via the Three Waters Committee, with its recommendations going to council. That's the decision-making framework which council has established for the business unit.
Neil?
Yeah, the water service strategy, once it's drafted, will come to council to adopt and to change.
Probably what I'm asking, the relationship between, if I use Ocean Farm, we did a budget sort of thing a few years ago it was, and that came out with a number, and then that number was, I think in here it said 3 million, or it could be more, but that turned out to be a number of 5 million, which turned up in the water services plan, but that number hasn't been really, so how do we get to the point where we're actually doing it without that being suddenly a budget line that we haven't actually really stress tested to the max?
Well, I think it's a reminder for councillors to do what you need to do when you're considering those matters before it's signed off. Like the council adopted the water services delivery plan. Council adopted it. It contained all the information that is in it. That is therefore approved by council. And if councillors feel they haven't chewed an issue enough or understood something enough, then you need to be doing that at the time we're asking you to consider and approve these documents. They're important. Once they are adopted by council, that is the will of council. So we would maintain that the money that is associated with the improvements for Ocean Farm has been approved by council, and the councillors have been satisfied with the information that they've received because they approved the plan with that contained in it. And so if that's not the case at the time the plan's being developed, then that's the time you need to question and prod and seek whatever comfort you need. Once you adopt the plan, that is approving the information it contains.
Neil?
Yeah, the wastewater strategy has now been developed in a draft and will be presented to council and workshopped before that gets considered in the water services strategy. And that'll have a lot more detail because of all the recent work that's been undertaken and also the understanding of regulations going forward for wastewater.
Probably my concern is that the budget was made up of a scenario of pivots and stuff, and now what we're doing is not the same. If we didn't have a quote, as it were, we had a quote, if you could say, from use of better words, to do X. And now we're doing something that's different to that, and we don't have the end point of what that whole thing will be. But we've just got a number plonked in there to say that that's a budget, fine, but we don't know what. You can't tell me hand on heart that you've got Rayners or someone in Ashburton who's going to put the stuff in and it's going to fit within that budget. So that's what I'm getting at. The strategy is fine, but we haven't got that number's in. But
because it's an ongoing piece of work, and each time the Water Services Committee meets, there is an item on Ocean Farm, and so the governors have the visibility of the process that we're following. Nothing is being done without committee members and council having full visibility of the work that is unfolding. There's nothing happening in a parallel universe to the information that you're already getting. And if the Three Waters Committee or councillors feel they don't understand enough or haven't got enough information or want to revisit it, then the opportunity to do so is at the Three Waters Committee, and then when that meeting minutes when it comes through to council.
Councillor Ellis.
Thank you. When Helen presented before, affordability is a big thing around setting the rates, and we know water is separate to us setting rates for everything else we do. But when it comes to affordability, we have to bring water back in, because there's no point in us saying, we need to do X, Y, and Z over here. We think our ratepayers can afford this, and then we add water on, and suddenly our total rates bill is unaffordable. So this is where it gets tricky, because the water services one feels like it's sort of set, and and the rest is going to get the leftovers, I suppose, as to what is affordable, and that's going to be the balancing act I think we're going to have.
Yes, I understand that. That's going to be the reality for those councils who formed a CCO either with their neighbours or on their own. The water bill, if you like, is not being regarded as rates. It's coming from a separate company. In some cases, it's coming in a separate envelope, but it's very hard to draw that distinction when we've developed a standalone business unit, which does look far closer to far deeper connection to council and other things that council does because of the structure that we've adopted for water delivery. But other water entities are sending water bills without regard to the affordability of their parent council's rates demand, because they're seen as separate things. And that is a reminder as to why when we were talking about our own rate increases this year, we tried to separate out the water increase from everything other than water, because nationally you're starting to see rates increases without any reference to water. And if we think that, and so the comparisons with a council like our own, which might include water, the comparisons are simply not valid. We're comparing apples and pears, and it's an unfair and unhelpful comparison for the community to be making. So that's why we've worked now to separate out the water rates increase from everything else, so that national comparisons and neighbour comparisons have some validity. Otherwise, it's meaningless.
Councillor Wilson?
It'd be great if we never mention the two together then, because it's easy, because we've talked about, well, just if we want to build that narrative, we should never say that our rates is 8%. We should say our rates are 4% and in water is 10%. And we should never combine the two as one number. I know the media might want to, but if we don't talk about it, you don't let that narrative be, that number doesn't exist effectively.
And we did try to do that for the annual plan this year, where we separated it out just for more clarity, I guess.
Yeah.
And to compare with other councils who had already set up their CCOs.
And perhaps the evolution of the way we present it is that we don't aggregate and have an overall increase. And so we only ever talk about water and everything other than water, and never put it together as one number for you. And we never talk about the overall rates increase because we're focusing so much on the separation. So I'm sure the presentation of the way we strike rates can continue to evolve. The intention is to give the community the most accurate information, so that the comparisons with other things they're seeing and hearing from other parts of New Zealand have some validity.
Councillor Everest.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. With respect, I think we should pull out roading from our rating comparison, because we have a much larger roading network than our urban mates. Now, I'm being facetious, but actually, where do you stop? And at the end of the day, our ratepayers pay the rates, and what they want to know is what is the total requirement, not where we put them in little cubby holes and place smoke and mirrors with putting water off to one side. I understand totally that makes sense from a benchmarking point of view, and I can see why we might do that. But actually, our ratepayers want to know what the total increase is, rather than what an increase is from one envelope or another envelope. And as I come back to my comment, roading is a large part of our component compared to others, and we choose not to take that out. So why are we taking all these other bits out? I think we need to be careful what we're putting forward here, that's all.
Councillor Moffat.
I'm just making an observation back to Helen, and she was talking about the financial strategy and making that more clearly communicated to the community in the long-term plan. So all of this, the way I see it, goes back to that clarity.
Okay, we'll keep going.
So this just highlights sort of the process of development of the water services strategy. Obviously, we prepare a draft, and then like everything, we do have to consult on that, but it's not via a consultation document. It's just by providing a summary of the major matters in the water services strategy. That has to be consulted on using the special consultative procedure, or SCP, which essentially goes out for a month. People who make submissions, they have the opportunity to speak to that. And we can consult on that alongside the LTP, and generally would, but in terms of the legislation, it has to be a discrete part of that consultation material, so it has to be separated so that people can see the differences between that and the LTP. It just shows that, again, just a little bit differently. The difference, again, I guess, in terms of audit, there's no obligation currently to audit a water services strategy. We're still a bit in the dark as to whether that might be a requirement in the future, and the Secretary of Local Government can require that, or we can request it as part of our sort of own assurance process.
So where does the Commerce Commission come in
terms of
the strategy? Are they involved in it at all, or?
They're involved as a stakeholder, and obviously in terms of making sure we're meeting their requirements.
Yep.
I'm not aware of whether there's any sort of specific requirement for their involvement.
Okay.
No, and their regime for the water sector, other than water care, is information disclosure.
Right.
So they've talked to us previously about the various steps of regulation that the Commerce Commission has available to us. The way they are starting with water services information disclosure, so that obligation is simply to provide them quite an extensive amount of information for them to assess the compliance of our business unit.
Any questions on that? No.
Okay, so that's all we had for that one, just to introduce you to that, and obviously there'll be further conversations on that as we move forward. The other part that we wanted to talk to you a little bit about was significant forecasting assumptions for the long-term plan. And again, we've sort of covered this briefly before, but I guess that the strengths and the risks of an LTP are sort of based on the assumptions on which it's based. They have to be reasonable, based on evidence, and internally consistent. We know that ultimately it's an assumption, so we can only use the best available information that we have at the time. And I guess the test is as to how those forecasts play out in reality. But we're using that information when we're preparing the LTP. So generally we have two types of forecasting assumptions. We have sort of a general set and a financial set. We're just going to focus on the general set today. So this slide just again talks about, I guess, about what they are. So they're sort of the best guesses. We use a range of evidence, and different subject matter experts like Infometrics and Stats NZ to help us with this sort of thing. And I guess the point there about uncertainty is that they're trying to make that as transparent as possible, knowing that we don't know what the future looks like in reality, but we can identify as much as possible and make that transparent through the assumptions that we're using. So we'll use them as part of the development of LTP in terms of cost, revenue, investment needs, planning, the service levels, things like growth and how that might impact. And they're used throughout each of the building blocks. And obviously if we know that or if some of them don't play out as we expect, then that will may materially impact the sort of financial forecasts and delivery that we've forecast going forward, which is important and why we have them. It's just a legislative picture of why we have them. And I guess the kind of the key words there is, that we want to identify just the significant ones. There's a whole lot of assumptions that I guess you prepare as part of an LTP, but for what we're using for an LTP, it's the significant assumptions, and that we're also identifying that the risks associated with them and the uncertainty and the impact of that uncertainty. So that's our current list of general assumptions. So obviously you'll be aware that we're living in a fairly dynamic environment within the local government sector, so it's fair to say that our assumptions in some senses might be a little dynamic as well. So there's a whole lot of stuff that we can sort of identify a position at the moment, but potentially we might revise that position as we go forward. But obviously at some point we have to stick a stake in the ground. And we don't know the full consequences of some of the detailed sort of policy, legislation, information coming through, rates capping as an example, and how that might impact and the detail around that policy going forward. So we will have a set of assumptions, but we may sort of update them as further information becomes available over the next 3 to 6 months. For each of the assumptions, we try and present them in a sort of a consistent format. So we detail what it is, describe the assumption and how it's applied. We include the data source and the rationale for what we've got. We identify what we think is the confidence level or the level of uncertainty around that assumption. So how the actual sort of outcomes might differ over that LTP period. We identify what the risks might be and the consequence of the variations to that assumption. So the potential impact on things like the council's financial statements, levels of service in our work program. And we also try and identify mitigation aspects, so actions that the council might take to respond to the risks associated with that assumption. So that just shows our sort of framework for confidence and risk level in terms of our current approach. It's not a perfect science. And really, I guess the next step was to just give the opportunity to feed into what general assumptions that you think we should have. So I've just put a sort of grouped the general assumptions into some themes in terms of what we have currently. So in that second column, and then the proposed is what we're proposing at this stage. And I guess at this point, I'm seeking any feedback as to whether you think it's a good list or whether you think there should be other assumptions, significant assumptions that we should also include as part of our work. So for the population demographic growth list, obviously we'll have population change, household change, demographic change in terms of age and ethnicity, and economic growth. Is there anything else within that sort of category that you think could be useful?
Councillors, any comments on that? It kind of seems to capture everything, but no, everyone happy? Councillor Ellis?
Thank you. Just change of land use, does that fall in under economic growth? I would have just, our environment's changing more to dairy, which does fall into economic growth, but
Yeah, to some extent, I guess it's important from an urban perspective as to whether there's increasing residential, so that's obviously impacting our levels of service for certain areas and services.
Councillor Moffat?
So would household change or demographic change include shifts from rural to urban, urban to rural, those sorts of
In
things?
terms of migration,
Yeah.
not specifically, but I mean we have that information available that helps feed into the activity management plans.
Okay. And also the household change would be numbers living in households?
Yeah, all that information is
Yep.
available as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Everyone,
Yeah.
Councillor Ellis?
just Stats NZ, their population change predictions previously have been pretty accurate, have they? If we look back for the last 3 years of the LTP, I suppose, it just feels like Ashburton's had a lot of growth, and I just wondered how that aligned with the predictions we had. So,
Tony?
Through the chair, yes, they have. I think through the DFC work, there was that perspective given around perhaps using the mid to high range of the Stats New Zealand projection. So that's possibly a conversation to be had through this LTP assumption work. But to answer your question, yes, they have. Sometimes growth can be a funny thing. It can feel like there's millions of people coming to town, but actually the numbers tell us something different.
Yeah, thank you. And I think Councillor Cameron has questioned that in the past. Councillor Wilson?
We used the medium range last time, did we, for population growth?
That's right.
That we
Yep.
did, yeah.
It segues nicely into the conversation later in the day about B&Bs we have, because that's popular. It's building house growth, but is it population growth? That's the question, isn't it?
Yep. Okay, so happy with those to all be included at this stage. Can't see anything else to be added to that.
All right, cool. So this next section's around sort of grouped into the local government reform. So currently we had a legislative and political change one. I guess for this we're thinking that we, given there's so much going on, we split it out a bit more and have specific assumptions around those four that we've identified there. The other local government reform aspect, so that involves things like emergency management reform, development levies, Building Act reform, climate adaptation, new GPS for transport, and no doubt other stuff that will come down the line. So that covers sort of everything else off.
Anything else to be added to that? I think that covers the main ones. Councillor Wilson?
How do you, the rates capping one's an interesting one, because if the legislation didn't come in tomorrow, the public perception is that we have rates capping anyway. So it's easy to rely on the legislation, but I think the public perception, and now politically we would have to rely on that doesn't matter if the legislation's there. If you see everybody believes that 4% is the rates is a realistic, no matter what happens now, that's almost, that horse is bolted. So how do you rationalise that decision to say that when, or not relying on legislation that's not in place yet?
So for us, that's the political wisdom that you'll bring to your decision making. We can outline to you the law, and we haven't seen it yet. But there is I think Helen referred to the kind of intel that it will be. There is an intention for the government to pass it before the election. If it is 4%, and if it is to be introduced in 2029, I'm sure every council in the country will be weighing up that legislative framework with the way the community sees that, and their expectations of whether 2029 is an appropriate time frame for councils to start living with that cap. So you'll just have to bring your own judgment to bear through this process as to expectations vis-a-vis the legal requirement.
That's quite critical though, because if we as the council decided, no, we want 4% and that's it, you would have to structurally change the council itself can't just gaily go on until get the end and go, we've got an 8% rate increase, how are we going to get back to 4? Too late then. We've got to almost assume from the start that austerity's in place if we're going to do 4% from day one, not when you've done all the work and it's too hard to circle back round.
Well, it is hard, not necessarily too hard, but in the end, all these workshops, all the conversations that you have, all the signals that budget managers hear and pick up, all feeds into the work we're doing to prepare the long-term plan and the draft budget which it contains. So clear signals from councillors early are easier to accommodate than later, but we simply have to respond to the way in which you allocate resources through the budget process.
When will we? It's easy to say that. We get to doing the annual plan and we get through halfway through it, and then we're told that the base cost has gone up X, and we get to perhaps look at some of the business cases and we can cut them out. But the base cost of council has gone up such and such, and the only time you can actually structurally change things is right back at the beginning of your budget process, which is almost that's what we're doing now. We're almost starting the budget process for next year.
Yeah. I think if the conversation then becomes about levels of service. So it's not that you can't change the base costs, because you clearly can, but you can't easily change base costs and do all the things that you expect to be done. That's the truth. And so then you have to have the conversations about what you're prepared not to have done in order to alter those levels. So. And even in this conversation, we've heard the competing way of viewing this particular LTP. One being ahead of reform, the sensible thing to do would be to signal the intentions loud and clear for things that this community might value, and we should be including them in the LTP so that that's not lost sight of. But that will have financial impact. And so you won't be able to have your cake and eat it if including all the things that you think might have value and you don't want to lose sight of them and you put them in the LTP, then it will make adherence to things like arbitrary limitations from a rates cap much harder to live with. And if you can't do both, you can't do both, and you'll need to signal as early as possible whether the rates cap is more important or whether signalling things of value to the community is more important, because they will tend to collide.
Councillor Ellis?
Thank you. There was a time when, in the LTP process, we went to the community and said to them, have you got anything else apart from what council has identified that you would like us to spend money on? And we used to ask that question and try and keep a bit of budget aside for that. I mean, it's how we got some gym equipment into the domain, basically, on the running track through that. But it's going to be very tight to be able to. And we used to send that message out there to people: if you want something, submit to the LTP, and then we will consider it. And we'll have to make a decision whether we're still going to do that at some stage, possibly too.
Absolutely, and that. Is an important part of it. I think there's another matter that we haven't contemplated yet as an exec team in any detail, but it was raised briefly yesterday. What transition costs for the reform are councils providing in their LTP budgets? It is not possible to merge 2, 3, 4 or 5 councils into one and not have costs. Systems are different, people are different. There are costs of that transition. The government hasn't. The government's been really clear. They're not on us. There's no government money for that transition. So what should we be providing in our long-term plan for transition costs? And you can start with a really big number if you want to. And how does that collide with projects the community might value, with a rates cap? and it all collides, and so it all must be considered and resolved, presumably by compromise to each aspect of those different world views.
And we've also had varying views on the rates capping, what it would include. So we've heard that it wouldn't include water and it would be just core services, but the list of core services hasn't really been defined yet. So I think there's a lot up in the air, and I think the transition cost of simplifying our local government could be a lot of money, and how do we factor that in? And I guess I think some other councils are looking at that at the moment. And aside from that, we've also got the spatial planning work that we're doing. So there's a lot of question marks up in the air, I guess, with the reform.
Yeah, and spatial planning is an obvious one. The reform has been advised that a spatial plan for the current boundaries of the Canterbury region is likely to cost between $7 and $10 million. $7 and $10 million. And our share of that will be X. How do we provide for that? Presumably debt. And then to Helen's earlier work around, debt limits and prudential, and the way in which you've got to pay debt back, and how does that then impact on levels of rates and expectations of the community. And some of those things are not avoidable because the law requires us to do them. And some of the more discretionary projects, which actually might be more highly valued by a community, are the ones that will be harder and harder to squeeze in, as the law requires all these other things that puts the pressure on the affordability perspective.
Hand back to you, Mark. What's the next one?
All good news, huh? So the next category is resilience and climate change. So we currently have a climate change assumption, and we are suggesting we maintain that, but also have a climate change impacts assumption, which is really, I guess, around the impact of climate change going forward and the increasing frequency and severity of those events, and how they impact on potentially council services going forward, or other community services.
So with
sorry, you go.
climate change impact, it's almost hand in hand with the natural hazards and emergency events, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the natural hazard sort of more talks about the potential for a big event to happen in this area, whether it's an earthquake or that sort of thing. So it's those sort of emergency events and how we respond to that.
Okay. Any change or additions to that area? Happy with that? Yep.
Okay, and this category is sort of I'll call them the sort of council operational ones. So we have a number of existing ones there. Availability of contractors, adequate staffing, other resources, sort of suggesting we split that into workforce capacity and capability, infrastructure delivery capability. The water services reform is obviously no longer a thing, so it's more about the water services delivery. So the assumption there would be that would maintain an in-house approach, for example. Levels of service, capital program, resource consents, and CCRs and shareholdings similar. The strategic assets, possibly wondering whether we remove that one, given it's basically an assumption that talks about the fact that we have strategic assets and that we'll maintain them over time. Whether we need that or whether it's covered within existing legislation through our significance engagement policy and LGA, I guess was the question there, as to whether we need that in there or whether it's already covered. That's your call. And then the development contributions was around potentially just moving that to the financial assumptions list as essentially a revenue source.
Councillor Ellis?
Thank you. Are you able just to give us a couple of examples of strategic assets that are in that space?
So we have a list in the significance engagement policy, talks about things like our roading network as a whole, our community facilities, our shareholdings, that sort of thing. So
they are covered under.
Yeah, I mean, we have to identify them as part of our significance and engagement policy, and if we choose to get out of them or change our ownership or look to get rid of them, then there is sort of a legislative process that we have to go through.
Because any land we've bought for strategic purposes tends just to sit in the property portfolio anyway, doesn't it? So
yeah, I don't think from memory that's on the list, but.
So is everyone happy that we remove the strategic assets from this? And what about the development contributions? It kind of makes sense to move them to financial assumptions. Any comments from anyone? Nope. Okay.
Okay, then just in brief, so these are sort of the categories, I've got to confirm these with Helen, but the financial assumptions categories that we'd look to have along those lines that we'll bring to you at a later date.
Just with the borrowing one, and I'll sort of harp on about this a little bit, are we going to see that broken down? Like EA Network Centre, we saw that as a building that we borrowed over a longer term for because of intergenerational debt, but and so that future generations paid for it. But now we seem to have lumped all our borrowing together, and it's hard to see where we are at with that building and as far as loan repayments and that sort of thing. Are we going to see where we're at with those different facilities?
Helen?
That's the piece of work that we're currently doing after working through the reserves and looking what was in the property reserve. So I have a resource at the moment breaking down all of the property debt to find out what we can identify belongs to those, particularly those specific key properties and the business estate, and that'll give us the information to be able to work forward to populate the debt repayments specifically against those properties for the long-term plan.
Councillor Everest.
Yes, thank you. Where does depreciation replacement follow through into that structure? Is that other?
Helen?
We'll have a conversation both through the financial strategy and through the budgeting process around funding the renewals, which is your depreciation replacement, so funding depreciation, because that's one of your key levers around your ability to fund. Ideally, you'd fund everything going forward for the future, but I don't think there's going to be enough money in the kitty to be able to do that, so you'll need to make some strategic decisions.
Because surely that's part of our key financial assumptions. It seems to be missing. I know I've discussed that with you before.
It is, but it's more of a strategic global approach rather than being able to specify it in a little box, I think. And you might make different decisions for different categories. Right. It's not an assumption that you can make in isolation beforehand. These are generally budgeting assumptions that we can apply across the board to everything, whereas your renewal funding is part of your overall financial strategy.
Beg to differ, but I'll leave it.
Okay, any comments or questions on this slide? Nope.
So we'll be drafting those up and then we'll bring all the assumptions back to you to confirm at a later date. So I guess that's it for these sort of building blocks at this stage, but we obviously have a number of workshops coming up, and we're just trying to work out the sort of framework, I guess, for those coming forward, just to make sure that we've identified what topics will go into what workshops. So we'll highlight that for the next workshop, which I think is the 12th of August. But we're going to go back into the revenue and financing policy conversations. So maybe if we have a 5-minute break, get set up and.
Okay, yep, sounds good. Thank you. So we can break now. Do you want to? So we are resuming the workshop that we had on our DCs and revenue and financing policy, and we were up to page 10. So hand over to you, Richard and Mark, to go through this. Thank you.
The activity on page 10 is district promotion and tourism. Together with business and economic development, this makes up your overall economic development activity and the work of your economic development team, and this activity is associated with the marketing of the district to visitors. At the previous workshop, you identified a group benefit of 70 to 100% and a community-wide benefit of 0 to 30%. The current revenue and financing policy has a 50-50 community-wide benefit and group benefit, and the group benefit is by way of a targeted rate on capital value, which I believe is the business amenity rate in Ashburton, Rakai and Methven. Noting from the earlier meeting that Council had at that point favoured a higher group benefit, more like 70%, and that was something you could consider at step 2 modification, which is today. The other issue that's relevant here, and it relates to the memo on Airbnbs, is that if you were wanting to bring Airbnb type activity into your rating system, then you need activities that benefit those types of land uses, and this would be one of those. My recollection of their last conversation around Airbnb, and the reason that we attached the memo, is that there are some significant administrative challenges around rating for Airbnbs. Some councils have tackled those challenges. It's safe to say many of them are much larger and better resourced councils than this one. My impression of your last conversation was that the issue of Airbnb was going to remain unaddressed for 2027 because of those challenges, but it appears our notes did not confirm what might have only been my personal aspirations for the policy, which of course are not relevant to your decision making. So really there's 2 questions today, and the first is relates to that question of Airbnb and whether you see that as being part of this policy for 2027. And then the second question is the step 2 moderation, depending on what you decide on the first matter.
So I know this has been brought up by the Methven Community Board, particularly around Airbnbs in Methven, and I'm guessing that they would probably put a submission into the LTP requesting some work done on this. So I'm just wondering, is it worth doing something anyway in anticipation of that? But Councillor Wilson.
I just want to clarify that. So the group benefit is where we're saying that the benefit lies with the tourism industry, and then the current one is we're funding it 50-50, so we're effectively not subsidising, but we're transferring some to the general rate rather than directly where the benefit lies. And I'm just understanding, what's that? Council agree with a higher group benefit, so what does that mean? I'm just 70 to 100% rather than 50, so is that saying that
That's saying that the benefit to business should be 70% rather than 50%.
So that's a targeted rate from the amenity, well, the business amenity rate. Yeah, does that make sense? Yeah. Councillor Moffat.
Just a question around short-term accommodation in general. Just looking at the information in the memo, Has there ever been a remit presented for a nationwide policy, and whatever became of that?
Hamish?
My recollection is yes, and if it wasn't a remit, it's certainly been national conversations about Airbnb. But the issues of identification, of control, that we face collide with everyone else as well. So there's been no easy way through the regulatory landscape yet, as far as I am aware. So some councils are trying to regulate to a degree of success, but it's not easy for all the reasons that we have found it not easy. Yeah.
Because the way I look at it, there needs to be consistency, you know, around the country, but yeah.
Yeah, there's no easy way to do that when each council has its own regulatory responsibilities. So there is no national standard as far as I'm aware. No.
Councillor Ellis.
Thank you. I'm just clarifying this 50%, 70% thing on the business amenity rate. It's not necessarily tourism businesses, is it? It's any business who's eligible for that amenity rate will pay it, whether they're tourism related or not.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Councillor Wilson.
Which would lead you to believe that's completely unfair, because a manufacturing business in Rakaia paying for tourist promotion in Methven is not how you would see the thing. Whereas, as we talked about, a B&B in Methven is paying nothing towards this at all, but they're probably getting the best benefit out of it. So I do like the should alternative funding mechanism to be considered, and I would say yes.
Councillor Everest.
So, in support of Councillor Wilson, I think the Airbnb is the challenge here, particularly in Methven, and to me it's totally unfair for business to necessarily be paying that additional sum when in fact there is a big component that are not taxed, inverted commas, at all, or rated at all. Richard, with your experience lower down the island, I mean, is everybody just avoiding, I mean, I've read the papers, but is everybody just avoiding this Airbnb, or do we actually need to think harder?
I would probably defer my answer to Tania because of her work and her team's work on the paper. But my recollection is there were 6 or 8 councils at least who have attempted to do some work in this space. Most recently, Wellington City Council, Auckland Council have done some work. That's why I referred to councils with more resources. One of the statutory considerations you have when you're working on this policy is to consider the costs and benefits of distinct funding mechanisms. If we're talking about maybe 200-ish Airbnbs in this district, picking up a small share of this activity, we're potentially talking about it costing us far more to collect this money than it would in terms of additional revenue for the council. I started by saying I would defer to Tania, but I haven't got there yet, but I am there now.
Thanks, Richard. I don't really have too much more to add other than just to back up what Richard said. We did do quite a comprehensive review of what other councils do around the country, and we've included examples of where councils are actively rating. So there's not that many examples, and they're largely either big councils or they're tourist-heavy centres. So that's where I'd back up what Richard said about the cost-benefit analysis. We know, for example, Christchurch City had employed a compliance officer just to find these Airbnbs. We're just not at that scale to do it. So.
And just looking at the Appendix 2, where you've listed the councils, like Ruapehu would probably be the the council that would be similar to us, because I don't think we can compare with Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, Queenstown, etc. The Rotorua model I had heard was very good. Did you find any information on that?
We can't find anything. We can find where they consulted on it, but couldn't actually find how it had ended up.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay, that's probably something. But only because I've heard their mayor speak at something I've been to about their model.
And probably just to clarify, so how we, if we couldn't find anything on the council's website, we were looking at policies, rating resolutions, and we're digging quite deep in terms of actually trying to find a rate. So there's a possibility we have missed something, but it was quite a challenge to sort of, unless the bigger councils had websites, a web page which dealt with it, but otherwise we were looking at rates resolutions to try and find specific rates.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Everest?
Yeah, so in the absence of data, then should we be looking to reduce the share to that group benefit from that 70%? Because we're actually not hitting the right people. And I'm not sure of the numbers. I mean, Richard mentioned there was perhaps 200 Airbnbs in the county. I've no feeling for that in terms of numbers, but we need to make sure we're actually tipping the right people. To Richard's point, I mean, the engineer at Rakaia is hardly adding to tourism. Yet he's going to pay for it.
So instead of the 70% group benefit, you would pull it back to 50%, and you'd look at 50-50. Is that what I'm kind of?
Well, I think we've got to have a compromise here. I mean, it's 50 or even less, to be honest, but I'm not sure what those numbers look like. We need to actually pull that out.
And I guess that targeted business amenity rate, Tony, you might have a bit more information on that, but that pays for like your public toilets and there's and some sort of beautification as well. Is that right?
Let me just go and have a quick look. Sorry, I haven't got that at the top of my head, unless Helen has.
The commercial amenity, the commercial rate does pick up the public conveniences at the moment, but don't think rates when you're working through the activities in terms of what exactly the rates are now. It's about assessing whether it's general rates or targeted rates, and then you'll work through the step of where those rates will then be applied.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Everest.
Yeah, my final comment on that really is that, and I know it's wrong making the comment, but East Street is a very good target for us, and we've actually got to make sure they've got viability as well. So, let's not just pick on the businesses. If we actually are all contributing to that gain, then we should pay the price.
Councillor Ellis.
Yeah, thank you. I like the 50-50 split, but when it comes to Airbnbs, I can see change coming over the next few years anyway that will incorporate the whole country, and I just don't think we've got the financial resources to tackle our area. I know it doesn't help those businesses in Methven that are affected by Airbnbs, but I think change is in the wind, and I can see it coming.
Yeah. And I know there was a wee bit of work done through Brad in planning around Airbnbs as well, and he presented some of that to the community board. Richard?
Can I ask, what's the budget for district promotion and tourism?
It's $280,000 worth of rates revenue that's funding that activity at the moment.
My thought would be that if the industries that are benefiting from it aren't prepared to fund it and we can't fund them, why are we spending the money? That should be, because if district promotion is district promotion, that's wide, that's Ashburton as a whole, that's great. But tourism, if tourism as a business, is a true business, if we're using, we can't find someone to tag it on, but we definitely know there's people that benefit from it, and it's not the motels, because they're very hard to, they're just in the business amenity. That, to me, that leads to you don't spend the money. If the B&Bs we can't make them fund it, you don't spend the money. It's pretty simple.
I'm just wondering, do we need that tourism word in there, because district promotion promotes to all visitors, to everyone, whether they're tourists or not. So, yeah, that's just my thoughts. Councillor Ellis.
I think I was, Julia went off, and now I've lost my train of thought because of it.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's that business amenity, because it's hard to just target like those who you know, is it every shop that sells a coffee? Do they benefit? Is it, you know, someone comes in off the street and buys a pair of shoes because they happen to be in Ashburton at the right time at the right place and see something they want to buy? It's very hard to specify. If a business does really, really well and they want to upgrade their facilities, then they might go to their engineer and require and need some work done to do that. So it is hard to pinpoint where that flow-on effect happens. I mean, when we're talking 280,000, it's like per normal with these things. We spend more time talking about the things that cost dollars and not hundreds of thousands of dollars. But yeah.
And that's why I always come back to the district promotion, because it's not just about visitors coming, it's also about attracting people to live in the area, which then feeds on with, you know, creating new businesses and all that. So it's, yeah, the tourism word trips a lot of us up sometimes, I think, so. So are we happy with I know we've only got half of us here now, but we'll make the call. People happy with the 50-50 split at this stage? Yep. Yep, okay. And I'll try and find some information about Rotorua, because it's been talked up a lot, but just obviously not.
Okay. And can we change the name? I agree, district promotion, which includes tourism. I don't think we should specify both of them, because I think it's...
Yes, but it does cover the tourism support activity per se, and so, you know, the things that that team is charged with is, you know, it does have some sort of emphasis on tourism, and we've had our, you know, coverage of the influences that go to key spots and what that might mean for visitors and the tourism industry. So it isn't a dirty word. It is part of promoting the district for me, and I think perhaps the description does include both. It's just that we've got a particular issue around the Airbnbs. That doesn't mean we stop promoting tourism because we think we're not capturing one group. But up to you. We can call it whatever you feel most comfortable with.
If we want to leave tourism, I'm fine with that. But can we have a other revenue stream of 0 to 10% in there? Because it does show that we do need to find, you know, by doing this, we're just saying general rates will do it all. And that budget area is one that they have fantastic ideas and they want more funds to do more stuff. But by saying it's just at a general rate and business amenity rate, we're saying that those people are going to pay, and they're unwilling payers, you'd say. So we could signal to the community that by having another revenue stream, if you can grow that stream, we can spend more money. That's what I'm getting with the 0 to 10% or some other way of other revenue.
And I think the history through Experience Mid-Canterbury of the industry contributing directly, the point that particularly the large industry players make, is that their own marketing and promotion budgets dwarf anything the council's spending, and it's not that they're not committed to the promotion of the district and the promotion of theirs and associated businesses. It's just that they are already investing, you know, significant, you know, millions in some cases to the way in which they promote their own businesses, and the contribution, you know, is always grateful for the council, but they see their promotion via the district council as being complementary to the efforts they actually do make already.
Correct. Okay, Richard, we're on to campgrounds.
Yep. This is an activity that we need to bring you back more information on. So you should be seeing something on the 12th of August in relation to that.
Great, thank you.
Can I just ask one question,
Yes.
please? Why is the Ashburton Holiday Park not included, apart from historical?
Tony?
Thank you. It's because it's located on the Tinwald Reserve, and and that sits under the Reserves Act from the 70s. So any funds that are gained off reserve land have to stay for that reserve land. So it's treated as a part of the Tinwald Reserve Board's. It's an activity underneath the Tinwald Reserve Board for that purpose.
Okay, so cemeteries.
At the previous workshop, you identified a community-wide benefit of 30 to 40% and a private benefit of 60 to 70%. The current revenue and financing policy is a 20% community-wide benefit, but we put 40 to 50% of general rates into the activity and a private benefit of 80%, and we recover 50 to 60% of revenue from fees and charges. I think the first issue to note, and we talked about this at the previous workshop with some other activities, that your 20% community-wide benefit doesn't make very good sense alongside your 40 to 50% general rates input. Those percentages should be lining up. And this is the point to discuss step 2 modification, and I note in response to a request from the earlier workshop too, we have in the workshop papers on page 12, there is some information from other Canterbury councils on the funding sources that they use and the funding splits that they have, which are broadly similar with the funding sources that we use as opposed to the benefit split that we have in our policy.
Comments, councillors? Councillor Everest?
Just a question I couldn't find an answer to. What's the cost of maintenance of those cemeteries compared to burial? Because the reason I ask the question is there's an immediate charge, which is sticking someone in the ground or a plaque or whatever, but then there's the maintenance of that asset, which goes on and on and on for generations, maybe, depending on how long the cemetery site sits there for, and that should help drive that split, I might have thought.
Tony, do you have a comment to make?
Through the chair, I don't have that answer off the top of my head, but it's a good question to go on. I know for once. I could make something up, but no, I'll go away and find that out because it's an interesting question. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson.
This one comes back to it's not about the person being buried on the day, because I noticed in the media a wee while ago there was an article about the cost of burials varied across districts, and it was getting too high, and it's not, we all believe, yes, we want to bury someone in dignity and a nice place, but it's about the level of beauty that you want to have your cemeteries, and that's perhaps what Councillor Everest is talking about, the overall cost of doing it. It's not a level of the service, it's the actual extra stuff you put in. I think a good example of this would be where we debated last term about replacing the toilets and initially we had 2 extra toilets, which at 500,000 a pop would have eventually cost somewhere in the council business. So we need to perhaps looking at, rather than the split, it's actually the actual total cost of the stuff we do there, because it's, we're always going to fund it. We always have to keep it relatively at a right cost because it's a service we have to provide, but it's the general rate will always pick up the slack. But it's how big we let that slack get is more the discussion we need to be having rather than the split.
Tony?
Thank you, and don't disagree with the comments just made. We are noticing a trend, however, which is impacting on our ability for fees and charges, with a shift from burials to often just interment of ashes, and so that is altering the profile within the cemetery activity, and that's seen across the country as well.
Okay. Councillor Ellis.
Yeah, I mean, we have to align ourselves with what the actuals have been,
Yeah.
unless we want to really get tough on the cost of burials or ashes internment. But
So the 30 to 40% community-wide benefit and 60 to 70% private benefit. Is everyone happy to align with that one? Councillor Wilson?
Yes, but I take into account the staff comment that, you know, with the changing things from burials to, you know, people can't afford to bury them in a fancy big, you know, thing. They will go down to just, you know, we'll get burnt, plonked in a wee pot. So that should be reflected through to in the open spaces plan and how they're planning and funding. You know, we shouldn't be building these big grandiose cemeteries that may never be used for 100 years, because that's where our cost will be. We need to match, you know, the trends that are happening. I understand we have Muslim burial out there, which is quite expensive when you look at the fees and charges to do it, but it's so expensive that no one's using it. So that to me would be, you know, we've missed the mark there a bit, as was.
Hamish?
Yes, people make the choices they make around burial and cremation, not solely based on the fees people are charging at the cemetery. There's just a whole move away from the traditional burial. I suspect it's not motivated by cost solely anyway. Even the 60-40 is a challenge with the existing rates. It's still going to push rates differently to the current arrangement. In fact, as I understand it, that's likely to put the burial fees up even more, which will, if you believe that they are, that's a material factor in the choices people are making, there'll be even less fees paid, and rates is going to kind of have to pick up the difference. So even the ideal 60-40 is different to how we're currently having to fund cemeteries.
Russell?
thank you. There's a question there: should alternative funding mechanisms be considered? Has someone got something they've thought of? Because no. Oh,
No.
Below.
No, that's well, it's not a rhetorical question, but it's a question that we're asking each of the activities, but we don't have a particular answer for that. No.
Okay, so we're looking at, we've got the ideal, we've got the current. Where are we landing?
Can we wait for a little bit of clarity on that split? I know it's delaying it, but if we've got that split that Tony was going to look at, that might help clarify that.
Yep.
That's all.
So that would come back to the 12th of August. Okay, thank you. Righto.
But can I make a comment?
Sorry, I'll go quickly to Richard.
Yeah, just if I look at the expenditure we're doing in that area, you know, if I looked at the annual plan budget, you know, it's enormous the amount of money we're spending in cemeteries. So I do maintain, I'm unwilling to change the split, because I think all you're going to do is make it more unaffordable, less revenue. It'll make it worse. So we need to be careful that we don't put the cost up so no one can afford to be buried in a cemetery. And so you actually, you know, whereas I look at the list of things that we're doing, you know, fencing enhancements, we're doing all this irrigation automation, all this beautiful stuff that, you know, can we afford to do it? It's not fit for purpose what we're doing. So that's where I think we need to focus.
Rural beautification is another activity we're going to return to on the 12th of August with some more financial information for you. Likewise, urban beautification. Next one is library. At the previous workshop, we identified a community-wide benefit in the order of 10 to 15%, a group benefit also in that range, and a private benefit of 70 to 80%. I have to advise in a subsequent conversation with Sarah, she believes that we probably understated the group use of the library in that assessment, because there are a lot of groups that are involved in activities in the library. The current revenue and financing policy recognises that this is a 100% community-wide benefit, and we recover that predominantly through general rates, specifically the uniform annual general charge, and 0 to 5% from fees and charges, which I think is the likes of overdue fines, room rentals, those kinds of things.
No overdue fines anymore, Richard, but I think there is a lost book fine.
Sorry, I'm so good at getting mine back on time. I've not caught up with the modern operating practices.
And there used to be a reservation fee, and I think that's gone now too, isn't it? Yeah. But I guess meeting room fees would come into that as well.
Do they go to the library, Sarah?
Yes, they do. And through our booking system that was implemented, there's a number of rules that are attached to that, so that the community is aware of where they are charged and where they're not charged, and that ensures income. If there was a mandate from council to have no booking room income, then there would be no rules and everyone could have access to those rooms for free. But at the moment, that's how it sits.
So we're happy with that, Councillor Wilson?
Can you just explain note 2 to us, please? And just shift of operational property into...
Yeah, happy to. We've talked in discussing the commercial property activity about taking operational property out of, separating it from commercial property. And at the moment, the capital cost of operational properties is if you like, offsetting the revenue from commercial property. And if you then move the operational properties capital costs into the activities, then it reflects in activities like the library, the art gallery, our network centre. At this point, we need to show you what the impact of that shift will be on activities like this before you can, in complete confidence, make changes to that policy.
Richard?
This is quite a significant one because its budget's, nearly over $2 million, or nearly $3 million. So when we make a tweak, as Russell said before, a 5% tweak here is a significant amount of money that we're tweaking with. So we need to be very certain if the property change does make a difference, it's quite significant.
Mm.
And if the property change is likely to make a difference, and it will be a transfer, a charge to rates. To the property reserve. That's the impact of the split. So rates will go up, but you'll build up your property reserve.
Councillor Everest?
Yeah, I'm just sort of following my thought process on with that. If we're going to start fee cost recovery in all aspects, that's in terms of rental. We need to think about consistency of approach, and I guess that's the thing I look at. If we're charging for room rental hire, and you need to help me, Sarah, on that at EA Centre, and we chose not to charge it, say, for example, at the library, then we need to be consistent across those particular sites. I do not know the answer to that. I'm not sure what's happening, but that's what we need to be thinking about.
Yeah,
or the art gallery or whatever.
And council was very aware of that when this building was built, and the way in which we charge for rooms is consistent across our facilities currently. So a move to, say, free rooms at the library would create an inconsistency. At the moment, we are consistent. There is administrative effort to collect room hire fees. The effort is probably greater than the fees collected. but it does provide that consistency across all our facilities, and it's also a signal to the wider room availability market that you can't come to the council for free while they're charging, and there was a lot of conversations when this building was built about the impact on the likes of Community House and the likes of the senior centre. How would us coming into that market with this beautiful facility, how would that impact those facilities? And so all of that was factored into the way in which we have tried to find our place in the whole market, both consistent with ourselves, but not not torpedoing or kneecapping other facilities that have got complementary or similar services.
Thank you for that clarity. I'd have to say it is absolutely marvellous to see it being so well used by a wide range of groups, and so we wouldn't want to lose that as well.
Not.
So, I mean, that was my point, really.
Yeah,
Thank
and there's
you.
just rules around it that council established at the time to, give everyone a fair crack, not to have one group thinking that room was theirs as of right. So there's a whole host of rules around that. We get feedback from time to time on people who would wish that regime to be different. But until the policy settings are altered, we administer the policy as council adopted it.
So do we want to stick with our current, or do we want to look at the ideal funding split, or do we want to wait and get more information on that shift of operational property into the activities? Councillor Wilson.
I don't think even if we do change it's not going to make any difference, because the facility is the people that use it. I think we're unrealistic to think we're going to make them pay twice for a book, or that's not going to happen, because it's not what we do. But I think we need to keep in our mind that the split of how we pay for it's right. But again, I'll go back to, if we decide to put into operational and charge big depreciation, which is not very much at the moment, someone's got to pay. Therefore, the general rate has to pay. UAGC pays. So this is one of the classic buildings that we need to look at how we look at it long term. It's depreciation. Do we need to depreciate as fast? Are we going to rebuild it to the same extent in the future? Is it all that sort of, it's not a strict commercial building, is it? Well, Helen probably can tell us more.
It's probably less about the depreciation funding, because we're not funding all of the depreciation on the building at the moment, while we're making repayments on the building for the debt servicing costs, principal and interest, but those are largely falling into the property area at the moment. So it's about understanding, which unfortunately comes back to the piece of work that we are looking at too, around what is the actual debt on this building, and we believe it's about $39 million. So it's the debt servicing costs on that at the moment that are solely hitting the property reserve, because the amount that is being charged through to the library activity for the operational cost is the pure operational cost. It is not covering the cost of capital in terms of the use of the building. I don't know if I've helped any. No, but I would say that depreciation isn't the factor, it's the cost of the building.
That is helpful, because it underlines and much more eloquently the point that if you split the operational out, then the true costs are going to hit places like the library, and it will require rates funding, and that will be a direct transfer to the property reserve, because the property reserve is no longer having to pay the debt. So that's the consequence of that split. I don't think it challenges the revenue and financing split in any way. It's simply going to be the amount that will be channeled to the particular rate, as opposed to challenging some other way of paying for it.
Councillor Ellis.
Thank you. The numbers we get through the activity briefing of the users and everything else tell us what we're doing at the moment is pretty good. And so it's one I don't think we should change, because the public do seem to be supporting us and coming in and using the facility. So I'd be happy to see it stay as it is.
So the 100% community-wide benefit. Everyone happy with that? Yep. I think we might break for lunch now, if that's okay, because I see we've got the art gallery and then we've got EA Networks. They could take a wee bit of time. So we'll break now and we'll be back at 1 o'clock. Thank you.